Well, if you've ever heard that John Darby is the creator of the pre-tribulation rapture, and not only that it was some Freemasonic Jesuit order situation, then this is the video for you. We are finally wrapping up my series on the fact that the myth of John Darby, apparently the legend that he is, and all the things that go around about this guy simply are just not true. And today, we're hitting all those conspiracies straight in the face. Let's get after it. Welcome to Certainty for Uncertain Times. My name is Lauren, and the entire goal behind this channel is to help you navigate through the chaos, the clown world, and the dumpster fire that we all find ourselves living in these days through the lens of the Bible, but also while connecting the most crucial dots to Bible prophecy. Now, if you're somebody who's looking to connect the dots in the Bible's prophetic puzzle pieces, then guess what? I'm going to ask that you would subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and maybe give this video a like and a share. It does help me to circumvent the tech overlords who don't love me very much, and that's okay. And today we are jumping into the final installment of my series regarding the myth and the legend that is John Darby, and we are tearing apart and have been tearing apart the lies that go around about Darby in regards to the pre-tribulation rapture. So let me ask you a couple of things. Have you ever heard the pre-trib rapture was invented by a Jesuit? Then it was passed down to this Scottish teenage girl named Margaret MacDonald. Then it was hijacked by Darby, and then it was marketed by Scofield. Well, if you have, then congratulations, you have been on the internet just like I have. But the question we need to ask is any of that true? And before we dive into what is honestly probably my favorite video of this entire series, let me just say this. If you're jumping in right here, this is the final episode. You definitely need to go back to the beginning, because I didn't make this series just to kind of swat away the conspiracy theories. I actually set out to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that John Nelson Darby did not invent the pre-tribulation rapture, but that this idea of rescue before wrath has been taught all throughout church history, and that's what I've done in the videos previous to this one. And so we have truly gone era by era across all of church history, starting with the early church and the early church fathers like Irenaeus and Ephraim, the medieval and dark ages, the time that the Catholic Church had a stronghold on the church with voices like Brother Dulcino. Then we had the apocalyptic texts, and then we have the Reformation and Puritan eras. And there's a lot of names in there that definitely taught a pre-trib rapture. So you need to go check out these videos. So each one of these videos laid another brick on top of the foundation that I'm wanting to present the final blow to, which is simply that if you came here to talk about the conspiracies regarding the Jesuits, regarding Margaret MacDonald, Scofield, and Freemasonry, then this is the video we're going to handle all of that in. But if you're one of those folks that needs to see this, wonderful, but you also need to understand all the groundwork that I have laid before. With that said, let's get into the final installment of this series, where we're going to put every one of those claims to the test, historically, logically, and biblically. So let's go. Let's start with JND, also known as John Nelson Darby. So I got a lot of notes here for this video, and we're going to start with setting the record straight on Darby. I think that's probably the best place we can start so we can lay a foundation. So here's what we got. John Nelson Darby began developing his view of the pre-tribulation before, keyword before, any of the so-called influences could have reached him. According to Brethren writer Roy A., and I hope I say his last name right, it would be Hubner, Darby suffered a serious riding accident in December of 1826, and during his recovery over the next several weeks, he buried himself in scripture. He wasn't reading Irving or Manuel Lacunza, as people like to say. He was actually studying the Bible, and that's when the pieces started to come together. Now, here's what the critics like to claim, and what you'll see a multitude of videos and all kinds of stuff on. They claim that he stole the idea from Edward Irving, or that he copied Irving's translation of Manuel Lacunza's Jesuit-authored book, The Coming of Messiah in Glory and Majesty, or that he plagiarized a vision from a 15-year-old Scottish girl named Margaret MacDonald. Now, what I want to do is dismantle each one of these. Margaret MacDonald being the last one. I've talked a lot about her on other videos in this series, but we're going to hit it again since this is a conspiracy that people like to talk about. So let's jump into the first claim, which is on Edward Irving influencing Darby. So the short answer is no, that's not what happened. Irving was a historicist, and you need to know what a historicist is, meaning he believed the tribulation had already started and was unfolding across church history. He did not teach a separate rapture before it. He actually didn't separate the second coming into two phases at all. And most importantly, he never held to a pre-trib view. In fact, Darby later rejected Irving's entire framework, and this is documented by some pre-trib researchers as well. Here's a quote that I have from a piece of literature that I have. Irving spoke of a soon coming of Christ to translate believers, but this was part of his general second coming belief, not a distinct pre-tribulation rapture. Claim number 2. Darby stole it from Manuel Lacunza's book. Again, no. Lacunza's book wasn't even published in English until the spring of 1827. Now, this is months after Darby had already recorded his own conclusions regarding the pre-tribulation rapture. And here's the kicker that a lot of people seem to not just look up. Lacunza didn't teach a pre-trib rapture position either. He actually believed in a post-trib scenario. And he placed the rapture after the tribulation, hence post-trib. He also identified the Antichrist as a kind of moral collective more so than anything. And he denied the imminency of Christ's return, that Christ could return at any moment in any generation. Oh, and his book was placed on the index of prohibited books by Pope Leo VII because it exposed corruption in the Roman Catholic priesthood. Now, Lacunza wasn't trying to plant deception. He was actually just trying to survive the Inquisition. So even if Irving had read Lacunza closely, like going back to the first one about Irving, he still wouldn't have found pre-tribulation in it because it's not there. It's simply not there. Claim number 3, that Margaret MacDonald's vision had sparked all of this. Now, this theory was popularized by critics like Dave McPherson, but it honestly falls apart under just a smidgen of scrutiny. First of all, MacDonald's vision from 1830 describes believers going through the tribulation, not escaping it. So, simple question, is that pre-trib or not? It's not. She said, and this is a quote, "The trial of the church is from Antichrist. It is being filled with the spirit that we shall be kept." That's a post-trib angle, plain and simple. There's also not one piece, not one, of documented evidence that Darby ever saw her vision, ever read it, or ever even heard about it. So let's just recap the entire timeline here because I think it's just important to see it for what it is. So you've got on this, what I created for you here, you can see it. You've got Darby as the person. You've got the timeline of 1826 to January 1827. That's when he was developing the viewpoint. And then we have the disqualifier piece. So that's our origin point. That's where we're starting. Then you have Lacunza, who is a Jesuit. His paper, document, book, whatever, was published in English in 1827. It's post-trib. It has amillennial influence. And it is too late and theologically incompatible. And then you have Irving, right, who in spring of 1827 is when he translated this. And then he also was a historicist, and he didn't even teach pre-trib. Then you have Margaret MacDonald. That's in 1830. She was a post-trib visionary. She actually has some pre-wrath teaching in there too. And she's the opposite of Darby. So what's the conclusion? Darby stole absolutely nothing. He stole absolutely nothing. He actually had a different view than them, and he was ahead of them. So let's talk about what he actually did, because unfortunately, I feel like this guy just gets so much junk just thrown on him that isn't even accurate or right, but we actually need to talk about what he really did. First of all, he systematized a view that was already circulating in theological fragments. He clearly distinguished the rapture from the second coming, not just in timing, but also in purpose. And he emphasized a futurist, literal interpretation of prophecy, including Israel's restoration and a global tribulation. And as William Watson has put it so well in Dispensationalism Before Darby, which is the book I talked a lot about in the last video that we did, Darby's system contained nothing new. Even early interpreters like Increase Mather and others were working out how to knit together the many eschatological passages that would later become known as dispensationalism. You can find that on page 339 of Watson's book. What's the bottom line? Darby was a synthesizer, not an originator. And if your theory relies on him stealing from people who either didn't teach the view or came after him, I think it's probably time to get a new theory, right? It's time to figure out another reason that you hate the pre-trib rapture, but it can't be this one. Recently, I partnered with Alpha and Omega Gold, and here's why. They're not just a Christian gold and silver company, they actually share our pre-trib end times worldview. And if you've been around this channel for very long, you know how important that is to me. The truth is, we don't know how far things are gonna go before the rapture. And if you're paying attention to headlines, then you probably see that the powers that be are working very hard and diligently to crash the economies around the world, just like Bible prophecy foretold. And what I love is that gold and silver are tangible. They're not digital promises. And the best part, it doesn't require a fortune for you to get started. And even better, if you do have a retirement account and you want to turn some of those assets into physical gold and silver, they'll help you do that. They're offering a free precious metals navigation guide to help you start with clarity and confidence. We may not be able to avoid seeing the beast system set up, but we certainly can be prepared. Visit ao.gold/C4UT or click the link down in the description box to learn more. All right, section 2, the Jesuit theories that surround this whole doctrine and all of that. Let's get into these claims because they're the ones that I definitely see on the internet a lot. So let's talk about claim number 1, which is centered around a guy named Francisco Ribera, and the claims are made that he's the origin of pre-trib. This one, just, it's funny that it gets thrown around online so often. And, as a joke, it's usually made with ominous music, dramatic visuals of dark cathedrals and Jesuit robes, right? But here's the truth. Francisco Ribera was a 16th century Jesuit priest, but he held to what? Amillennialism. That is not the same as pre-tribulationalism or premillennialism. That belief holds to there is no literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. Let me give you some other things he believed. That the book of Revelation described symbolic events, not literal future ones. That the Antichrist would appear just 45 days before the second coming. That the papacy was not the Antichrist, as many Protestants claimed, which is part of why he wrote what he did. And he also claimed that there would be no rapture, no literal tribulation period, and no millennial kingdom. So in other words, here's what you need to know about Ribera. He was a staunch Augustinian amillennialist, aligned with Roman Catholic replacement theology. He rejected futurism as we know it today. He rejected a literal 7-year tribulation, and he had no concept of the church being removed before God's wrath. So to say that Ribera invented the pre-tribulation rapture is almost like saying Charles Darwin invented creationism. It's just wrong. It's the exact opposite of what's true. And then again, scholar William Watson, who wrote Dispensationalism before Darby, cuts through the noise with this quote. Any claim that Darby adopted Ribera's futurism is absolutely groundless. Ribera's amillennial theology and the absence of a pre-trib rapture position in his eschatology completely separates him from Darby. Not only that, here's what you need to know about Darby. He was extremely anti-Catholic, especially during his ministry to Irish peasants. He preached heavily against the Church of Rome. Way to go, Darby. Way to go. And he rejected all Catholic theological frameworks, including Ribera's. So here's what you have to ask yourself. Like, if you're touting this online or you've seen someone who has, like, now you can ask them this. Why would Darby, a devout Protestant, champion of literal futurism, and one of the most outspoken critics of Rome in his day, borrow theology from a Jesuit priest who denied everything he believed in? The answer is pretty simple. He wouldn't. And he didn't. Now, I have an article down below that you can check out called Attack on the Pre-trib Rapture, and you'll learn a lot more about this claim and Ribera inside of that article. Claim number 2, Manuel Lacunza invented the rapture and Darby stole it. Now, I know we kind of went over this, but I'm going to give you just a wee bit more background because this is one of these Jesuit claims and I want to give a little bit more information on it. So here we go. Absolutely false. As we kind of already discussed, his theology stands in direct contradiction to Darby. So let's break it down. Like I already said, he held to a post-tribulation historicist view of prophecy, meaning he believed believers would go through the tribulation and that many prophetic events were already unfolding in history. He rejected the concept of imminency, that Christ could return at any moment, which is foundational to the pre-trib view. Here's a quote I have too. Lacunza did not believe in the imminent return of Christ. Darby did. That alone disqualifies him as a source of Darby's view. I mean, it is that simple. Here's the background, though. Yes, he was a Jesuit, which it doesn't even matter because it has nothing to do with Darby. But he wrote under the name Rabbi Juan Josaphat ben Ezra, not to deceive, but to avoid persecution after being exiled from Chile, denounced to the Inquisition, and he was banned by Pope Leo VII. So Lacunza's opponents denounced him and his book, which addressed the corruption in the Roman Catholic priesthood before the Spanish Inquisition, and his book was placed by Pope Leo VII on the Index of Prohibited Books. So again, there's some key theological differences here, just to go through them one more time. I also want to drive this home because I see these names so often. But Lacunza believed that the Antichrist was a collective moral entity, not a singular person. That is a far cry from what Darby believed in his futurist view, and that the Antichrist is a person, right? A man. Lacunza denied the imminent return of Christ, and he wrote that the Thessalonian church had to be corrected for expecting Christ at any moment. Again, totally incompatible with Darby's position. And he supported Roman Catholic dogma and rejected the rapture as a separate event from the second coming. There are significant disparities in the theology of Darby and Lacunza, not least Lacunza's advocacy for Roman Catholic dogma and his contention with Paul's letters to the Thessalonians, and that it just all of those things in conjunction with each other just kind of show you that that doesn't even work. Like, it just theologically does not work. Their frameworks were different. Everything that they believed were different. The final nail in the coffin, though, should simply be that Darby never even referenced Lacunza in his writings, not once. And Lacunza's book wasn't published, as we've already discovered, in English until after Darby had already formed his theological point of view. And Irving, who translated it, as I mentioned above, wasn't pre-trib either. It is also true that Irvingites spoke of a soon coming of Christ, but this view was part of their second coming belief, not distinct to a pre-trib rapture. So the conclusion is pretty simple. Lacunza was not a source of Darby's theology. He held opposing views on the time of Christ's return, the nature of the Antichrist, the imminency of the rapture, and the structure of prophetic fulfillment. Honestly, the claim isn't just weak. It is a weak claim. It just shows people haven't done any research or reading, but it really is historically and theologically impossible. If you're hitting the gym and not seeing the results that you know you should, we gotta talk. You just can't out-train a broken nutrition system, and that is exactly why I'm talking to you about JoyfullyFit Nutrition. My husband built this for people who actually show up, put in the work, but they're winging their nutrition or they're using outdated methods to try and get into shape. All these quick fix diet plans mess with your metabolism, and JoyfullyFit Nutrition fixes that. You get custom macros, calorie targets, a weekly roadmap, a full course, meal plans, a community, and a Q&A once a month with the legend himself, Lance. And the best part? It's under $100, and here's the deal. If you use my coupon code C4UT10 at checkout, you're gonna get 10% off, not just one time, but every single month after that. Now, if you're almost ready, but not quite there, that's okay. You're gonna wanna try the 14-day nutrition fix first. But the whole goal is to finally help you get the results that you've been working for. Both the links for these programs are down in the description box below. All right, so of course we have to get into the next section, which is all about C.I. Scofield, which is another thing that I just see so much fallacy on the internet around, and I just kind of made a joke about it here on my outline. Scofield was a crook who used dispensationalism to make money. I mean, it's pretty much what I've seen online in regards to C.I. Scofield. So this is probably one of the most emotionally charged accusations, though, in the bunch. Critics love to bring up Scofield's past, so I got some questions. Wasn't he a drunk? Didn't he commit forgery? Didn't he abandon his family? Didn't he do jail time? Wasn't he tied to secret societies like the Freemasons? So, great questions. Let's take them all seriously for a moment. Even if one of those accusations were true, it still wouldn't disprove the theology. God has always used flawed people to teach the truth. And that's just the bottom line. Noah was a drunk, Moses murdered, David committed adultery, Paul persecuted Christians, Peter denied Christ 3 times, and Martin Luther, had deeply anti-Semitic writings later in his life. Now, if we start disqualifying everyone with some moral failure, we better be ready to throw out most of Scripture. And many of us shouldn't be doing what we're doing, right? The validity of doctrine is not judged by the perfection of its messenger. That's just the bottom line. It's actually judged on whether or not it aligns with Scripture. But I do want to talk about the conspiracies because I think if we are going to bring these up, we actually need to dismantle them and talk about them. So let's talk about this one. Was Scofield and Darby, were they involved in secret societies? And the big answer is no. That is a claim that is absolutely baseless. I went digging and I went deep to try and find out if there was anything to the rumors that Scofield and Darby were Freemasons, they were in the Illuminati, they were Luciferian agents, and do you know what I found? Zero, absolutely zero documentation. No letters, no journals, no secret meeting records, no photos, no archives, or even fringe books out there that provide some kind of primary evidence for that. There's nothing. What you will find, though, are blogs, YouTube videos, poorly researched articles that throw around connections like this. Scofield was a member of the Lotus Club in New York. Sounds like the Illuminati. Or Darby influenced Aleister Crowley. Must be Luciferian. Or Jesuits were behind dispensationalism because, well, reasons. But there literally is no proof of that anywhere. Even the most well-known anti-dispensational critics, people like Philip, I hope I say his last name right, Mauro, M-A-U-R-O, that guy, never accused Scofield of being part of a secret society. He's got a book, actually, that was written in 1927, and it rips dispensationalism apart, and it criticizes Scofield. But he doesn't say anything about any connections that he had. Now, scholarly works on the Niagara Bible Conference and the Plymouth Brethren, that's where Darby ministered, can also contain no mention of occult ties. They only contain like serious theological debate. That's all that's there. And Scofield's supposed scandals, yeah, I think it's pretty, you can find that he had a rocky past. It's not really in dispute. But critics somehow leap from his moral failings to some kind of intentional deception, and it's really a jump without a bridge. Being flawed is just not a reason, or it's not the same really, as being a part of some Luciferian conspiracy. And listen, y'all know this about me. If you've been on this channel for any length of time, my entire shtick sometimes on here in my biggest passions is actually exposing the Luciferian agenda. And, that's the thing. It's like, that's not some wild theory. The Luciferian agenda is Bible prophecy 101. Satan is absolutely conspiring with human agents to deceive, to corrupt, and build a false kingdom on this earth. It's the overarching storyline of Scripture. So when I started hearing claims that Darby and Scofield were somehow secretly involved in part of this agenda, I'm going to be real honest with you. I needed to know. I got to lean in. I got to see, is there any truth to that? Because if it were, I would just be the first to say so, to jump on here and do it. But after all the digging, cross-referencing, and searching, there's literally nothing. There's not even a breadcrumb of primary evidence to support any of this. And if this theology had truly been cooked up in some Jesuit backroom or some occult society, you'd better believe I would truly want to expose that. I talk about all this stuff all the time, but it just wasn't. And the idea that it was is honestly, it's just another tactic from the enemy, and it's a distraction from the real deception at play. So here's the thing. Next time somebody says to you that Scofield was just a Jesuit plant or a Freemason agent, I want you to just ask them a simple question. Ask them if they have a primary source for it. Can you show me the letter? Can you show me the diary? Can you show me the published writing? And they won't be able to. There is no such thing. It does not exist. The accusation exists for one reason, and it's one reason only, and we're going to discuss that next. And it's really about discrediting a theology that these people already hate. It's not about history, it's about an agenda that they have. All right, quick pit stop real quick. If you have been following this entire series where we have been completely just shattering all of the myths around John Darby and the pre-tribulation rapture, then what I want you to do is you've got to go over to Joel over at Free the Rabbits channel right now and check out his series. He is in the middle of a massive deep dive right now, dismantling the Satan's Little Season theology and showing how the entire framework actually traces back to Gnosticism. It's so good. And here's why I want you to go there. So his third episode, which actually dropped last week, and clearly I have already filmed this, and I said, oh man, I've got to do a voiceover to tell people to go watch Joel's video. It goes into all of these claims that we've talked about thus far and the ones you're getting ready to hear in the remainder of this video, but Joel did it with even more receipts. And when I say he went deep, I mean the dude went deep. He dug through the original books. He pulled excerpts. He cross-referenced sources, the whole deal. The link for Joel's video is down in the description box. And here are just a couple of quick clarifications that he covered that I thought were relevant to throw into this video. So the first thing is, yes, C.I. Scofield was a part of the Lotus Club, as I made the joke earlier, but the Lotus Club was not a secret society. And Joel goes into some great detail on that. And get this is the crazy one. The term dispensationalism wasn't even in circulation back then. In fact, it was actually coined by Philip Morrow, the attorney and the author I mentioned a few minutes ago from 1927, who put out that book about dispensationalism and how much he despised it. He's the guy who actually came up with the term dispensationalism. And here's what's nuts about this guy. Morrow himself was a Freemason. Yes, you heard that right. The guy who actually coined the phrase dispensationalism was a Freemason, and he was buried in a Masonic cemetery in Culpeper, Virginia. Meanwhile, you know the rumors. We hear all the time that Scofield and Darby were Freemasons, and it's completely false. I went to the Mason website, can't find nothing on them. And then here's the last thing that Joel mentioned as well. The other thing that I didn't actually address too much in this video, other than making a joke about it, was the connection to Aleister Crowley. Well, that's a rumor. Darby was not connected to Crowley at all. And what Joel talks about is that Crowley's granddad was part of the Plymouth Brethren, which is the same movement that Darby was in. And after a health incident where they chose to pray instead of calling a doctor, Crowley started to turn hard against faith. And that's the connection. And it's been distorted beyond recognition because Crowley's family and granddad especially was a part of the Plymouth Brethren. So here's the point. These talking points that you guys hear all the time and that we all come up against, they're actually quite easy to knock down if somebody would do the trail of evidence and just search it. And Joel walks through all of it in detail. And like I said, it is an insane amount of detail. So the link is going to be down in the description box. Definitely go check out this episode and for sure watch the entire series if you can. And just a heads up, Joel is actually going to be joining me on Voices of Certainty. We're filming together in December, and we are so going to be talking about Satan's Little Season because this whole series that he has done is absolutely been so in-depth and amazing, and I want him to bring that conversation to this channel. Now, back to the rest of the video. So the question we need to ask is, what is really going on here? Why do these myths keep circulating? And honestly, the answer to me is pretty simple, because bad theology always needs a villain. When people can't argue scripture, they go for other things. And here's some of the stuff that you've probably heard, or maybe you've said, I don't know. It's escapism. When the pre-trib rapture doesn't happen and the tribulation comes, you people are going to fall away. I've heard that. Okay, go on somewhere. It props up Zionism. Well, we believe in biblical Zionism. We don't support political Zionism or all the crazy that's going on with all of that. Nope, that doesn't work. It supports Christian nationalism. Nope. It came from Catholics and cults. It was invented to manipulate people during the world wars. It's a part of a Jesuit plot to deceive the church. So the problem is that instead of rightly dividing the word, these folks are playing 6 degrees of separation and they're calling it exegesis. They don't want to deal with the text, so instead they attack the people. And what happens is you have this guilt by association that becomes their primary hermeneutic, and these exposed videos replace actual biblical scholarship. But here's the raw truth. Darby didn't invent the rapture. He refined a framework. Let me say that again. He refined a framework, and that framework had been developing for centuries. He systematized it. You won't get me disputing that at all. That is what he did. He gave language to what believers had already seen in pieces all throughout history. And the point is that his work, it didn't emerge from a vacuum. It stood on the shoulders of countless voices that came before him, and that is exactly what all of these videos up to this one have shown. I've shown it clearly from the early church to the apostolic fathers to the medieval believers in exile to Reformation era pastors to Puritans and post-reformers. Literally every stage of church history, these men and women saw a very clear pattern. The church would be caught up before wrath, a rescue before judgment. Did they use all the same language? No. Did they see the timeline perfectly? No. But they were all reading their Bibles and taking God's promises seriously. That's the legacy. It's not a conspiracy, it's not a deception, and it's not the Jesuits. Just Bible-believing Christians trusting that when God says we're not appointed to wrath, oh, here's an idea, he actually means it. And while we're on it, I do want to clear up one last thing. And that last thing that I want to clear up is the fact that people are constantly throwing stones at the pre-trib theology when they're actually mad at something else that they don't even understand, and that is dispensationalism. They act like it's some fringe invention or a coded word for some Zionist propaganda or something Scofield pulled out of thin air. But here's the reality. And I really want you to think about this if you land in that camp, or if you're somebody that's heard somebody, there's questions you can ask them. God has always dealt with humanity differently across time. Not different ways of salvation. I think that's where the confusion sets in, as people think that dispensationalism believes in two different variations of salvation. No, we don't. It's through Jesus alone, faith in Jesus alone. The Jews don't get a pass because of who they are. They still got to believe in Jesus. Anyway, there's always been grace through faith. Everyone, including the Jews, must believe in Jesus. Let's just say it that way. But there are different instructions. There are different covenants. There's different stewardship, which is also another word for dispensation, over time. It's what the Bible calls, and hopefully I can pronounce this right, I can't. Oikonomia. It's Greek, okay? But it's translated as dispensation or stewardship. This is why I have notes here, by the way. It simply means God's ordered plan for managing his people through the ages. And here's Ephesians 1:10. In the dispensation of the fullness of times, he might gather together in one all things in Christ. So here's the real question. Let's just break dispensationalism down into its simplest form, okay? Do you believe Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and the church were all given the exact same marching orders? Of course not. That's a crazy question for me to ask. Why? God's program unfolds. And that's all dispensationalism says. It's simply that God's program unfolds. Now, J.B. Hickson always jokes about this whenever he's talking about dispensationalism, and I love it, and I thought I would put this in here. He has 3 easy ways to know if you're already a dispensationalist. 1, do you go to church on Saturday? Nope. Okay, then you believe the Sabbath command for Israel doesn't apply the same way under grace. Number 2, did you bring a goat to church last Sunday? No? Okay, then you agree we're not under the Mosaic sacrificial system anymore. And the last one, which is kind of funny, number 3, do you garden in the nude like Adam and Eve? Hopefully not. Okay, hopefully not. And if you don't, that just proves that we're not in the same dispensation as Eden. So here's what I want you guys to stop doing if you're doing it. Quit acting like dispensationalism is some dirty word. It's not. It's biblical. It's logical. And it's how you're already reading the Bible, even if you've never used the label. So let's recap where we've been, and I'll link the whole series for you below if you want to go see it. But we talked about the early church voices like Irenaeus and Pseudo-Ephraim, who taught imminency and escape before wrath. We talked about medieval figures like Brother Dulcino, who boldly proclaimed, and I mean boldly, a pre-trib style translation before the Antichrist, and were burned alive for it. Whew, what a time to be alive during when the Catholic Church is stronghold on everything. We talked about the Apocalypse of Elijah, which is a 7th to 8th century set of documents that describe the righteous being taken away before judgment. We talked about the Reformation and the Puritan voices and all of those folks that taught that the saints would be raptured out to heaven before the final wrath. And in this episode, we've talked about the myths around Darby, the Jesuits, and Scofield. And we actually decided to just investigate the facts and see what they are. So the bottom line is, as I've said a billion times, Darby didn't steal it, referring to the rapture, pre-trib. The Jesuits didn't invent it. Scofield didn't manipulate it. And the rapture was not created in a lab in 1830. So here's what I want to say to you. If this series helped you clarify the truth further, do me a favor. Comment below. Tell me what shocked you the most. Tell me what you didn't know. Share this with someone who parrots this. We need to get rid of this, right? Share the whole series, but if they're one who believes in all these conspiracy theories, send them this so they can see the truth. And then, of course, subscribe. If you want to stay here, get to know what's going on in the world and Bible prophecy, this would be a great place for you to go. And until next time, I will see you in my next video. So keep your eyes on the sky and keep your ear listening for the shofar. Maranatha.